Hi everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. We here at Corex Academy are so proud and honored that you chose to join us at our webinar today. We still have a number of attendees joining us over the next few moments, so of course you can relax. This is a bit of fun, it's very informational, and we hope it's going to be of amazing value to you today. It's wonderful to see so many people who have an interest in or just piqued curiosity about CIS regions, who are joining us from so many countries today to hear about CIS markets. So today, what can you expect? You can expect an amazing webinar. We have amazing and wonderful lineup of speakers, and they will introduce you to countries in the CIS region, including, for example, the stands like Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, etc. And of course, you will also hear about the Ukraine and also about Georgia. So please take your time. You have a few minutes. Get your water, get your coffee, get your tea, whatever else relaxes you. And there's no need to take notes today, as we will share the webinar recording with you by email at a later stage. Of course, it's very, very important that this is an interactive webinar, so your questions are very, very welcome. It's very important that you ask questions, and please feel free to ask anything of any of our speakers. If we cannot address your questions today, we will address them at a later stage by email to you. You will get a personal reply. We also want to mention that as a thank you, each attendee today will be issued with a Corex Academy certificate of attendance, including the speakers. With that, I'll see you in a few moments and just chill out. I'm looking forward to this. We are just waiting for a couple of other people just to arrive. As we all know, we try to start our webinar on time, and we are usually on time, but at the odd time it takes people a few minutes just to get warmed up and get here. So just bear with us, please. Another moment or two and we'll kick off. I want to welcome Katerina. I want to welcome Michelle. I want to welcome Andrei, and I want to welcome Luke, who are our four wonderful speakers today. I'm really looking forward, guys, to going through this webinar today. Thanks for your time. Our organizer today is Corex Logistics, and Violetta here is just giving me heads up of when we can kick off. I've just been told that it'll be another 3 minutes before we start. So it's definitely time for you to get your coffee, your water, or your tea, or whatever else will keep you relaxed. So just bear with us, please. One of the good things about our webinar today is that you're going to hear about CIS, which I'm sure a lot of people joining us today actually haven't heard much about CIS or even what CIS is. So it's great that you're going to get that information today. You're going to actually have a huge amount of information shared with you by our speakers today. So we can start and kick off. So hello, everybody, and welcome to Corex Academy, and thanks for taking the time to join us today. Our theme today is 10 tips for breaking into CIS markets for clinical trials. So what is Corex Academy? Well, it's a knowledge sharing platform, and we facilitate collaboration and support professional development in pharma, biotech, clinical trials, and clinical trials logistics and services sector. We do host events, webinars, workshops, and professional training programs. My own name, very quickly, is Noel Quinn. I'm your moderator today. I've been involved in the CT business and clinical trials business for about 5-6 years at this stage. And I spend half of my time, basically I spend my time equally between CIS, Russia and Ireland. So today, why are we having this webinar? Why are we holding it? Well, we have partners in different CIS countries who suggested that internationally very little is known about our markets. So we agreed together, and we're very excited to bring you this informational video to you, this webinar to you today. A huge amount of information will be shared by our speakers. Can we also ask you to fill out a questionnaire at the end of the webinar to tell us what themes are of most interest to you, the audience, to listen to and to hear presented at our next webinars. So our theme is CIS. So why is our theme CIS today? Because there are huge advantages and huge unexplored opportunities, exciting opportunities to do business and facilitate everything under pharma, biotech, clinical trials and clinical trials, logistics and services in a market, in an emerging market of close to 300 million people. That's a very large untapped market today. Today, we hope to create through the webinar a little bit of intrigue, a little bit of awareness and interest around the CIS markets. And this webinar, while it does introduce you to the CIS market, we also hope it will help you form an opinion on whether you should develop your business there or not. So from our speakers today, we expect that you're going to learn, among other things, why you should not fear the CIS markets. Very important. A lot of people have a base fear when they hear about CIS or Russia or Ukraine or any of these countries. Why you should consider these markets for anything to do around pharma, biotech and clinical trials. Also, how to start doing business in these markets. And of course, you'll hear about some perceived challenges and how to overcome them. You'll hear about some legislative issues and moving into Eastern European and CIS markets. And finally, we'll get around some logistical and regulatory considerations and much more. We have 4 great speakers today, each an expert in their own sector, who will share great new information with you. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker, Katerina Pogodina. Katerina is Managing Director at Janssen in Russia and CIS and GM at Johnson & Johnson LLC. Katerina began her career at Janssen, the pharmaceutical division of Johnson & Johnson. In 2015, she was appointed Executive Director of Janssen in Russia and CIS. And in 2019, she was appointed GM of Johnson & Johnson. In 2021, she became co-chairman of InPharma, the Association of Pharmaceutical Companies. She's also an author at Forbes and is well-known speaker at major pharma events. And we're very, very proud to have you. So today, her theme is on CIS market prospects for pharmaceutical business. And so I would like to welcome you, Katerina, and all the speakers will switch off their videos so as to give you maximum screen time. You can take over sharing the screen. Thank you.
And I hope you can hear me. Good. So hello everyone, and it's a great pleasure to join this conversation. Now I'll share my screen. Yes. So this is a great pleasure. I love to speak about the country, and especially giving that this year the CIS commemorates 30 years since its formation, so it's quite a way which already have been taken. And today, CIS takes up to 16% of the global territory and 5% of the world's population. And you see that it's from 4 to 5 of the global GDP already. So Today, also, the big focus on integration to the Eurasian Economic Union. So this will give even more common things to be done, including the clinical trials, and we already see it. And it goes without saying that today, if to see in the EIU, that total GDP is 1.5 trillion US dollars. I need to mention that although you will see that I'm mentioning also Ukraine and Georgia, that they are not a part of CIS countries legally. However, when we speak about these territories, most of the countries consider them together with this cluster. So when I speak of the territories, I will include them as well. And here also we need to mention that economic forecasts show that the minimal economic growth in Eurasian Union stands at 3.54%. However, some experts say that given the current production capabilities and labor resources and scientific and technological potential, there are good prospects to achieve yearly growth rates at about 8%. So this is for sure something to bear in mind. When we are talking about the EAU common market, we also need to mention the common pharmaceutical market. And the history starts from 2017. And it means that 5 countries are harmonizing at the moment regulatory procedures regarding the pharmaceutical technologies and products. This will also give the opportunities to all the countries, not only those who are part of the Union. And especially this is very important when we're speaking about the clinical trials as well, because according to the regulation, you can use the procedure of now starting this year, you need to use the procedures for the whole Union. We see that pharma market has demonstrated good growth potential. It increased in 2020 by 17% independently of this COVID crisis. And this is mainly because of the focus of all the governments and bringing the investments in healthcare and pharma industry. This trend, as we think, will continue. And by 2024, the market might have another 1.5-fold increase. And this is what we see the most of the experts see at the moment. If to speak about positive things that we have, we see that investments are here. And you can argue whether there are lots of challenges on the market. Yes, the challenges still the part of our life. However, we see lots of positive trends. We see that governments across the regions are prioritizing spendings in healthcare and social programs. We see that a lot of special programs are created on the territory, giving more opportunities for the patients to have the access to the innovative treatment and solutions. We also see that there is a huge focus on the development of innovative pharma industry, and we see it both the strengthening of the innovative pharmaceutical local players and also international companies to join the market. And this also leads to the fact that the governments are putting the efforts to ensure that there is access to these innovations. And as well, I think this is also very common to other countries worldwide. We see the big trend for digitalization, and it comes also to the health care system. And we see these digital transformations in Russia, in Kazakhstan, Ukraine, and Uzbekistan. So all this, as you see, is very close to the European Union programs, and also this all stimulates pharmaceutical industry in the region. Sorry. It's quite a busy slide, but here I wanted to demonstrate how the activity of different industries in CIS after COVID is ongoing. So you can see this also demonstrates how important the sector is, and even shows that how the activity increased during this COVID time, because there is no doubt that the sustainability of the healthcare system is usually leads to sustainability of the economical system as well. When we are speaking about CIS, this is for sure, it is impossible not to mention Russia for sure. So with the leading economy in the region, so we see that GDP per capita in 2020 stands for $4 trillion, and this is sixth position in the world and second in Europe. It is estimated that Russia will return to post-COVID level of economic activity earlier than most of the European markets. So we also see that there is a very strong and improving business climate in the country. And to bring you one of the examples, that there is the ongoing comprehensive guillotine reform, which is aimed also to aimed at regulatory and legislation optimization, which will help to improve business and economic environment. And these reforms for sure covers healthcare sector, not only pharmaceutical, but healthcare sector in general as well. Also, it's why we're speaking about healthcare and saying that this is very attractive for everyone as the industry, that healthcare and well-being of citizens were announced as top priorities for the country. This was announced by the president, and there is an ambition to achieve 78 years of life expectancy and by 2030, and to compare this will add additional around 6 years of life to the population. To this end, the national project on health has been implemented since 2018. And there is a special focus on oncology, cardiovascular diseases, children healthcare, including orphan diseases. State spending at the moment at around 3 to 5%, and it's stable, although we can argue that there is a way to go. However, we see that it's quite a substantial sum at the moment. the last several years, also the government is supporting the pharmaceutical industry by implementation of the special Pharma 2020 strategy. And during this period, we see lots of technologies that were transferred to the country by the international pharmaceutical industry, and also the number of competences that were built by the local players as well. So here we speak about the expertise in localization in all the means. And digital technology, as I mentioned, this will be another growing trend for Russia. So we see the development and also development of artificial intelligence instruments. Also, government is creating a digital system in healthcare. We also see that there are stimulate actions to develop of telemedicine, e-commerce market in OTC pharma is growing. So this all shows how important the health of the population and how the government brings all the instruments to ensure that the innovative solutions can be accessible by the Russian population. If to speak about the other markets, we can see that during the recent years, there is a progressive healthcare transformations. We also see that there is a prioritization of the healthcare in the agenda of these governments. Of course, all these countries are very different in terms of challenges that they meet. I think that from the growth perspective and the potential that we see the social changes and changes in the healthcare, we see, I would mention Kazakhstan as one of the rising stars. We see positive changes both in the structure of the healthcare. We see the introduction of the reforms bringing more opportunities for the patients in the market. We see the start of the obligatory medical insurance introduction, and if to compare, there are lots of efforts now to ensure that there are all the necessary environmental changes to ensure that clinical trials also can be performed there, so there is a huge potential. Ukraine, despite of the fact that there were some turbulence there, the growth is expected. There is a good trend in all the reformations since 2017. The country is assessing the health insurance and trying to implement this in the short run. We also see the good background to protect innovation, and we see integration of European legislation in patent protection sphere. For Uzbekistan, and I think this is one of the markets that usually on the radar of the companies, and we are also looking at all the developments there. We can see relatively stable political environment at the moment there. we also see that healthcare is announced as a state priority, and there is an introduction of the obligatory medical insurance. We see that there is a good start of, and at least there are signs of the or signals that partnership can start in the country. So this is also one of the countries to observe. For Georgia, well, again, probably what to mention that at the moment this is highest expenses on healthcare in CIS, and we see the stability in terms of economic and political environment. So, of course, if to compare Russian market with other markets, they are all at the different stages, although all of them have their own special areas to focus, and especially we need to watch the changes and the trends because of regulatory changes due to Eurasian Union creation. What I can see that healthcare is likely to remain the top of the governmental agenda in all these countries. We also see that the growth will bring to the attention the innovations that they come, and availability and accessibility to the patients. Of course, the countries will remain interested in attracting investments, including in pharma market, pharma industry, and this will spur the economic growth. So, especially given all the harmonization processes in EIU, we need to ensure that we can have a step into these countries and see how the legislation is evolving. It's not only now national, it's not only national procedures that now are important, but this is the common EIU environment that now matters. So in a nutshell, I think at the moment, this is the cluster that can represent one of the fastest growth, the priority to the healthcare, lots of opportunities, and I really see the huge potential in the country, and especially looking forward to see the solutions that are not yet available to the patients, but can become available once all the players can consider coming by themselves or through the partnership on the territory of this beautiful cluster. No?
Okay. Thank you very much, Ekaterina. That's really been wonderful, and thanks for sharing your insights and your experience today. For sure, you've shared some great up-to-date information and relevant information, which is very, very important. Before I just give you a question, I'd like to ask you a question. Can I just say to you, on the first slide that you used as the background to your first slide, the artwork is really beautiful. It struck me, I just thought it was wonderful. Yeah, really, really nice. I want to congratulate you on it. So I do have a question. So you've mentioned in your slides there about the growth trends coming. Can I ask you, how confident are you and your organization that the growth trend in CIS that you've shown in your presentation can actually be achieved, especially within the period, say, to 2024? which is what you were mentioning in the presentation. Could you just give us your insights and your opinion on that, please?
And thank you for noticing this picture. This is pictures made by the actually patients suffering from different diseases, and this is the way how they express themselves as a social rehabilitation. So in terms of growth, we are pretty sure, and the latest developments show that there is a huge proof for that. So the focus is there, and even with all this corona crisis that everyone faced, if to see how the sustainable the investments into the healthcare are lots of regulatory changes that really helped to survive. So government really immediately put all the measures to ensure that the patients are well safe and will continuously receive the solutions and treatments. And with that, if to see the number of current governmental programs that are put in place, and you can see that they are not only for 1 year, and in all the budget papers, you can see that this is at least for 3 to 5 years from now. So yeah. We can be sure that in next 4 years, this will be one of the biggest, one of the fastest growing clusters, at least in Europe, or probably even worldwide. And yeah, we are pretty sure.
Thank you very much, Katerina. It's been really a pleasure hearing you with the wonderful presentation you've had today. And I'm sure the audience feels that you've given some great insights into understanding about CIS region. So I understand you have you have something urgent to attend to now, so we won't expect you to join the panel, but we want to say thank you very much again. Thank you very much. So I would like to go on then to our second speaker today. And our second speaker, it's a pleasure to introduce a gentleman called Luke Jones. So Luke,
okay,
great to see you. So
thanks very much.
I want to introduce Luke to you. Luke is an author and a business director, HR services with Terralink Global, and he covers the areas of Russia, Kazakhstan and UAE, to name a few of the regions he covers. During his time in Russia, Luke has written 2 books, A Guide to Successful Hiring in Russia and CIS, and Why Russians Don't Smile. Both of them are really guides to doing business for foreign business people in Russia and CIS. Luke is also the author of several columns in periodicals and is a frequent guest on TV and radio programs concerning careers in Russia and CIS. He's an active member of various business associations in CIS. So today, Luke's theme is what it is like to conduct business in Russia. And Luke will share some insights on cultural differences, how to overcome them, and doing business in CIS. So, Luke, without further ado, I'd like you to get into your lovely speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Noel. Now, if we can go straight to the presentation. Yeah, as you can see, I wrote a book called Why Russians Don't Smile, and the usual reaction people have is, but we do smile. Now, of course they do, but the stereotype is there isn't, that they don't. Sorry. So what I wanted to do was just to spend a few minutes on dispelling some of the main stereotypes that people have about this part of the world, because let's not forget that this 30 years ago was one country that is now 15 countries. And I get the impression sometimes that people think that anything east of Poland is one big grey gulag and it's all the same. Well, it's not. There are some fundamental differences to these countries. The first thing I would say is that if you haven't been out to this part of the world, then first of all, if you're planning a trip, ignore everything you've ever seen or read in the international media or believe the opposite. For some strange reason, you will never hear anything positive. Now, Russia in particular doesn't really do positive PR at all. And I'm being modest here. Now, what we find is that the first reaction of most people who come here is, oh, wow, it's normal. I didn't think it was going to be like this. And I said, well, what did you think it was going to be like? And it's like, but the only thing we saw on TV was, you know, tanks and Russian mafia shooting and invasions. And it's like, but it's normal. You know, people go about their daily business just like anywhere else. It's like, what a surprise. Violetta, can we go on to the next slide, please? Right. And on that point, honestly, the people I know who live, whether they live in, you know, Moscow or whether they live in Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, honestly, these places are much, much less dangerous than wherever you come from, even Switzerland. You know, again, there is this stereotype that if the country ends in stan, then it must be like Afghanistan and there's a war going on. Well, there isn't. These are extremely stable countries and they're safe and, funnily enough, friendly as well. Next slide, please. There we go. Another frequent stereotype is that it's always cold. And yeah, it does get cold. My mother is from Canada, and yeah, that gets, you know, pretty cold as well. So does Scandinavia. You know, parts of Europe get cold. And do you know what? It gets really hot here in summer. It's plus 31 degrees today in Moscow, right? So autumn and spring are about 3 weeks long, it seems sometimes. So pack a coat and a hat if you're coming in winter, but leave it behind when you're coming here in summer. Next slide, please. And funnily enough, not everybody drinks vodka first thing in the morning or during the day or in the evening, actually. These are a lot of the time outdated Hollywood stereotypes. You know, do people drink out here? Yeah, of course they do, just like they do in most other countries in the world. But, you know, don't be surprised if that you're offered a cup of tea or coffee and not a bottle of vodka when you have a client meeting out here. Next slide, please. The C word, corruption, is one of the regular things I hear. Oh, we can't do business in Russia. It's too corrupt. Well, do you know what? Most of the world's largest companies operate very successfully and have done for 20, 30 years out here. And they would not tolerate an environment that they couldn't operate in, let's say, cleanly. All right. Is there a corruption issue? Yes. But most of the time, it's embezzlement from state budgets. It affects foreign companies much, much less than you might imagine. Next one. The other one is sanctions. A lot of companies actually self-sanction. They sanction themselves. They assume, oh, there are sanctions in Russia, so we can't do business out here. Well, do you know what? You can. The sanctions actually affect very few areas of business. It's usually, unless your investors are close friends of Mr. Putin, or you're digging oil below a certain level, or you're trying to get financing for from certain Russian banks, then it's not an issue. And obviously, there's a lot of other countries where there are no sanctions at all, like Ukraine, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. So I really wouldn't worry too much about sanctions. Next slide, please. There's a highly literate workforce here. Okay, there's a lot of brain power. However, the one area to be aware of is spoken English is not great. Okay, what I find is that the education system teaches people to read and write more than they do to speak. And people are a little bit shy about it. So don't be surprised if the level of English is not what you're used to. It's improving, but you know, expect really good emails, but people not quite so good when you meet them face to face. Luckily, signs like this are the exception rather than the norm, but just bear that one in mind. I also find that if people out here don't understand you, they won't tell you, so because they're shy. Next slide, please. This is probably one of the biggest misunderstandings, that just because people out here, whether they're Russians, Ukrainians, whatever, because they look like us, it doesn't automatically mean that they think like us. The mindset over here is more Asian. People, whether Russia CIS is more spontaneous, it's more emotional decision making than we are used to. We generally pre-plan, and decisions are made using logic and pragmatism. And this is something you'll get used to by the fact that, forward planning here, a lot of people say, well, it's pointless because you don't know what's going to happen. Well, it's not strictly true. Okay, this might not be Canada, but it is still pretty stable, a lot more than you'd think. Next slide. And finally, people do smile out here, just not always immediately, and it's unlikely for no reason. If you think about it, Europeans will smile, not necessarily because they're happy, but to make the person in front of them feel comfortable. So, whereas here, people will not smile straight away, but if they do smile, then you've definitely made a good impression on them. Okay, next slide. Finally, here are my contact details. Obviously, I wanted to open this up for questions. If we can go back to if we can finish that up. Yeah, what I've done is I will, in the chat, put the link to my book here, Why Russians Don't Smile. You're welcome to download that. Let me just see if I can do that straight away. That should come up now for you. What I generally say is, look, I've lived in Russia for half my life. I've been to all 15 of the former Soviet countries, most of them regularly. I've been to Ukraine, Kazakhstan 30-something times. And what we find is that, it's actually probably the best thing about doing business in this part of the world is that so few people come out here because they're immediately put off by the fact that it's like, oh, it must be dangerous. It's, unexplored. Because let's face it, these countries were closed for 70 years and now they're open, and they've been open for 30 years, but still very few people come here. What I'll also do is I'll put in the chat, I created a channel on YouTube with some videos about different parts of Russia, just to give you an idea of what it's like, because I wanted to give a different view just from what you get in the international media. So have a look at that. Please download that. Feel free to share it with anyone, and happy to open up to any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Luke. That's been really, really informative. Really appreciate that. It's sharing your experience, I suppose, as an expat while living in CIS. It sounds like it's been great fun while still facing challenges and things like that. So a question to you. As you've said, you've lived more than half of your life in CIS as an expat. And, I suppose I've lived a part of my life in CIS as well. And one of the things I've found is that people you've mentioned are shy. I also find them very humble and authentic. And when you were showing the slide about the people smiling, actually that resonated with me, that when they smile at you, when people in CIS or Russia smile at you, it's very, very authentic.
Yeah.
Like in the West, it can be a little bit different. So the question I actually have for you is that with your life in CIS as an expat, what are the biggest current issues or challenges in business you're facing today, especially since the COVID-19 pandemic? It's the first time we've brought it up in the webinar today. It won't be the last time, but I would like to ask you, what are your biggest current issues or challenges in business?
Good question, Noel. What we tend to find is that the biggest challenge generally with this part of the world is selling it to your global headquarters. Okay, no matter how successful businesses are out here, there's such an image problem. And it's not just Russia, it's a lot of places. I mean, for example, Kazakhstan has even discussed the idea of changing the name of the country to the Kazakh Republic, just because they know that the word Stan at the end, significantly reduces the amount of inward investment, because people assume it's Afghanistan or Pakistan. And unfortunately, let's say, bad reputations are harder to lose than good ones, but even if there was no bad one to lose in the first place, sadly, it is something that people in the world, everybody likes to think that everywhere is dangerous except where they come from themselves. I mean, I've been to 145 countries, from anywhere from North Korea to Venezuela to Yemen, and you know what? They were all fine. But coming back to the actual question, generally, yes, it's a tough sell internally. So what I usually say as a solution is try to bring people from your headquarters that out here, show them around. Far too many people come here and they see very little of what it's really like. They see a hotel, an airport, and an office, and they think they've been to Moscow, Kiev, Baku, Tashkent. Whereas if people actually got around and saw it for themselves, it would be great. But unfortunately, people believe what they read in the media and they assume it's dangerous. So that's the biggest one. In terms of COVID, I have to say Russia's lockdown was literally about 2 months. Since about June last year, everything's been open. Yeah, you have to wear a mask on the metro or if you get on a plane, but everything's been open. And the government have essentially let people work it out for themselves, that if you feel vulnerable, stay at home. And older people have been encouraged to do so, but everybody else has been told, okay, get on with it. Because another important point is that out in this part of the world, people do business face to face with who they like and with who they trust. Okay, whereas where we come from, we tend to automatically trust anyone anyway. There's a good analogy that I use in my book. The difference between a Russian and an American is like a peach and a coconut. So you can meet an American standing in line somewhere, and within 20 seconds, the guy is telling you his life story, but it's just chit chat. It's like the smooth part of a peach. But to become close friends with a guy could take you forever. A Russian is like a coconut. It's like tough on the outside. It's automatically a little bit of suspicion, sort of, what do you want from me? You want to do me some harm. But once you get to know them, it's like the inside of the coconut. It's sweet, and they'll do anything for you. So generally, whereas Canada is the kind of country where everything works and nothing happens, in someone like Russia, CIS, you have to be prepared for, expect the unexpected and prepare for extremes, but it keeps you on your toes.
Luke, thank you very much for sharing that with us. It's been a real pleasure. And for sure, as a little bit of fun, for sure, you'll be my go-to guide for any information on where to go in CIS. We'll certainly we'll keep that in mind. So please stay with us, Luke, for our question and answer session.
Happy to.
Thank you very much again, Luke. So now I would like to introduce our third speaker, Andrei Polyakov. Andrei, good day to you. It's great to see you joining us today, and we're very, very honored to have you. So Andrei is country medical director with Janssen in Russia and CIS. With over 30 years experience in pharma and medical research, Andrei has been the country medical director in Janssen Russia and CIS since 2016. Andrei is a qualified doctor, and he leads the medical affairs function in this company, which includes supporting commercial functions through strategy development and market preparation for new products. His department is also responsible for supporting initiated studies and named patient programs, which I think everybody in the business will agree is so relevant today in these amazing times. So today, Andrei's theme is why conduct clinical studies in CIS region. And Andrei will share an overview of the clinical trial landscape in Russia and CIS, and he'll go through some perceived challenges and key opportunities. So without further ado, Andrei, I'd like to welcome you. Please take over the screen. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction, Noel, and it's my big honor to be one of the speakers. Actually, after so colorful and bright Luke's presentation, I'm afraid that my might seem a little boring because I'm going to share some figures and graphs, but I hope this will be also quite useful today. Sorry, I will share my screen in a minute. Okay. So my task today to talk about the reason why to conduct clinical studies in CIS region, and from my perspective, I just selected three reasons for this. It's first of all, it's of course marketing authorization purposes. And on the next slide, I will show why I believe that it's one of the most important things. If some sponsors, some companies which conducts international multi-center clinical studies want to accelerate patient enrollment. So I believe that CIS region is really good region to do this. And again, I will talk a bit about this further. And if you are going to develop some new medicines for developing world or for emerging markets, again, this region is very attractive for this because we have many patients suffering with infectious diseases like HIV or viral hepatitis or tuberculosis, especially when we talk about MDR form of tuberculosis. So why it's important or even necessary to conduct clinical studies in CIS region if you want to get marketing authorization. So here is quite a busy slide, and I'd like you to take attention just on some text which is in yellow. So it says that clinical trials commenced after 1st January 2016 have been conducted in compliance with the international agreements and acts which constitute the law of the Union, and at least one clinical study has been conducted fully or in part as a regard of data obtained from the study subjects within the Union, which means that if you want to get marketing authorization inside Eurasian Economic Union, you can conduct clinical study or to include one of countries the members of this union in the study. You will have the possibility to submit a dossier, and then this data should be accepted by all countries, all members of this Eurasian Union. So that comes from 2016, but to be honest, in my personal experience, I don't have some examples when we conducted a study in one of these countries and we received marketing authorization in other countries. But I can say without some details, of course, that we have few projects in Johnson & Johnson now in EIU region to get marketing authorization in several countries by conducting of a study in one of these countries. So if we are talking about the situation with clinical studies in CIS region and particularly in Russia during COVID time, again, you can see that the situation with COVID-19 really didn't influence significantly number of international multi-center clinical trials in Russia. For example, you can see we have even some small growth, roughly 3% compared to 2019. But for other studies, for example, for local clinical trials with foreign sponsors, we see some significant decrease. But I believe it's not just the only reason is COVID-19. There might be some other reasons for this tendency, let's say. So the very important topic when we talk about conducting of clinical studies in CIS region, and again in Russia in particular, because I have data provided by Association of Clinical Trials Organizations on some statistics, so it's mostly focused on Russia. Definitely we should talk about timelines for approval and permission to conduct clinical study. And you can see that for a long period of time, we see quite stable situation with roughly 120 days for approval and receiving permission from the Ministry of Health to conduct clinical studies in Russia. I can say that in such countries like Ukraine or even Georgia, the situation is even much better. And for Georgia, to my knowledge, it takes approximately 1 to 2 months maximum to get permission to conduct international clinical studies in the country. In Ukraine, it might be a little bit longer, but it's very similar to what what timelines we have in the European Union, for example. So this is quite attractive situation, I believe, for those who want to conduct clinical studies in the region. If we look into what kind of clinical studies are conducted mostly in the region, and again, particularly in Russia, of course, it's mostly phase 3 studies, and phase 2 and phase 3 studies occupies almost 90% of all studies conducted in the region. So, but at the same time, we see quite rapidly developing infrastructure to conduct earlier stages, like phase 1 studies. And we know, and from my personal experience, again, I know several sites which are really focused on phase 1 studies, and they have really good infrastructure and experience in recruiting of healthy volunteers if these volunteers are needed for the phase 1, for example, studies. So this situation is also changing, and maybe we can see some increase in number of earlier stages, earlier phases of clinical studies in the region. If we talk about therapeutic areas, I believe it might be interesting to participants of today's webinar, what kind of therapeutic areas are most interesting for conducting of clinical studies. Again, I use Russian data, but I believe it's really similar to other members of CIS region, Eurasian Economic Union, or Georgia and Ukraine. And you can see that majority of studies are conducted in oncology therapy area, in neurology. Last year was quite an unusual year because we see almost 10% of studies were dedicated to COVID-19 topic, and we have also quite many studies conducted in gastroenterology, in IBD, for example, and oncohematology as well. So less in rheumatology, dermatology, endocrinology, and ophthalmology. So, and we have not many clinical studies in infectious diseases, unfortunately, because again, there is a huge demand for new treatments in such socially important areas of healthcare like HIV or tuberculosis. So I believe that we can see some increase in number of studies in our region in such therapeutic areas as well. And what kind of challenges we have working in R&D area in clinical studies in Russia, CIS region. Mostly it's related to regulatory environment. It's getting better, of course, but we still need to continue to harmonize regulatory environment with EMA and FDA. And again, a huge progress achieved in Georgia, Ukraine. Big progress we see in Russia as well, and Kazakhstan as a rapidly growing market is also doing a lot of good things here. And again, Eurasian Economic Union will help us a lot in this in the near future. So what my personal experience again is that sometimes it's really difficult to interact with Russian health authorities, with regulatory bodies when we submit some let's say, a dossier with a new product, which is first in class, for example, or new technology, it's really difficult to establish really good communication, because you know, we have to submit a dossier and then to wait for some when some review will be completed, and then we will get some additional requests maybe, or some questions from regulatory body experts. But sometimes it's much easier than when you ask questions in advance before you submit your dossier, and then the timelines will be much shorter. So unfortunately, for the moment, it's really difficult to establish such kind of interactions. But again, I see quite a good progress, and maybe I can share with some experience in cell therapies, for example. We are in good communications with our health authorities, how to conduct clinical studies, such new technologies like CAR-T, for example, in Russia and CIS region. And we definitely need some further improvement in regulatory aspects of new technologies like biomedical cell products, gene therapy. We have, I think you know that we have a separate law called Federal Law 323, which regulates biomedical cell products circulation. So we have some uncertainties in this law for the moment. And for example, again, if we talk about CAR-T technology, it's really difficult to submit dossier in frame of requirements of this federal law, because just one example, this law requires to provide samples for expertise before you start clinical study, which means for us it's impossible to start the study, because we should take first cells from patient and then modify these cells and then provide this modified cells to patient. So if our regulatory body is asking us, provide us some samples, we should take somehow cells from patients who are not the part of the clinical study, so which is impossible, of course. So that's one of examples where we need to continue to our discussion and consultation with our health authorities. And I believe it's a common issue for not only for Russia but also for other parts of CIS region. So I think that's all I wanted to share with you today. Thank you very much for your attention. Well.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrei. In actual fact, I actually was thinking to myself, wow, you know, Andrei, your depth of knowledge and experience that you're bringing to us today, I'm certain, just as it's hit me, I'm certain it's of great benefit to our audience today as well. So really, thanks very much for sharing your medical and your CT experience, your studies experience with us. One thing I want to actually ask you, a small question. I suppose in your presentation, you mentioned about timelines for approval and permission of anything from 30 to 60 days to 120 days. I know that's in different countries, but I think it's actually very, very impressive, you know, and I suppose, as you mentioned, asking the questions in advance helps speed up those timelines as well. Yeah. Yeah, but the question I actually have for you is, I understand that, let me come to COVID-19, the pandemic. It is something that has absolutely dominated worldwide our media exposure, media coverage. I understand that a number of CRO organizations in CIS region suffered severely and some have actually not even survived during the pandemic, so they won't be reopening. So can I ask you, what influence has COVID-19 pandemic had on clinical trials in general, but we'll say especially from phase 1 to phase 3 studies and the supporting infrastructure in CIS?
Yes, no, thanks. Thanks for this question. Yes, I think we will talk about COVID-19 for a long time. Yes, it's definitely impacted our work in clinical trials. And maybe I will mention one point that was really painful for us. We just started some clinical studies requiring recruitment of patients from hospital and to keep patients in hospital for a certain period of time. And of course, we didn't have this possibility during lockdown time, and several hospitals based in different cities of Russia were just locked for COVID-19. Yeah, they just accepted only patients with COVID-19, and they stopped any activities, including clinical studies, unfortunately. So we had to, revise our timelines for patient recruitment and for the studies, and that was really painful because it was the part of international studies. So, but the same issue, I believe, was in other countries, in other parts of the world, not only in Russia or CIS region. So that definitely impacted patient enrollment rate. And the second point I'd like to mention, that was our communication with investigators. We lost the opportunity to meet them and to do the regular monitoring of the sites. So and that was mainly the issue of my colleagues. We have a special department called Global Clinical Operations in Janssen, and they are fully responsible for the operational part of clinical studies here, and they were really very let's say innovative in this, and they established a kind of remote contacts with investigators, and they continued to work with investigators, and the recruitment was started immediately as soon as lockdown was stopped, and several hospitals opened for patients with diseases which we are focusing on in our clinical studies. So I would say yes, there was an impact, but we were able to manage the situation and to continue clinical studies in our countries. And even in Kazakhstan, we are increasing our activities for the moment, and I believe there is a big potential in this region despite COVID-19.
Thank you. Kazakhstan certainly seems to be getting more than its fair share of mention today in the webinar, which is very, very interesting. And I'm sure at the panel we'll have a little chance maybe even to discuss that in a little more detail. But Andrei, can I say thank you very, very much again. It's been really a pleasure listening to you. And I can see why the clinical trial studies future looks bright for CIS. So please stay with us for the Q&A session.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrei. So now I come to the final speaker of the day, and our final speaker today is Michelle Devine. Like myself, she's an Irish lady. She's the Business Development Director of Corex Logistics. Michelle has, even for her slender years, has a wealth of experience in business development with the clinical supply and logistics sector, having worked with Almac Diagnostics and Randox Laboratories. She provides solutions to clients from leading international pharma and biotech, including Daiichi Sankyo, Roche, Abbott, TP, and Teva, amongst others. Her role at Corex sees her analysing and developing new market opportunities for Corex Logistics globally. Today, Michelle's theme is looking at the top 5 countries for conducting clinical trials. And Michelle will share her thoughts on logistics and regulatory affairs, and she'll give some real life examples of doing business in CIS. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome you, Michelle, and you share the screen and tell us what you're going to talk about today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Noah. So I will give you all a quick run through on why CIS and some of the markets that we at Corex, alongside Corex Academy, have a lot of knowledge and expertise in, and we will look at reasons why CIS is important for the clinical trial industry, and we will also have a look at the different types of therapeutic areas that are experienced and some of the top pharma companies today and how they actually utilize these markets. So I will share my screen. Okay, so why CIS markets? Here at Corex and alongside Corex Academy, we have experience in the likes of Armenia, we have experience in Belarus, we have experience in Russia, Ukraine, Georgia, with a new facility up and coming in Q3 in Kazakhstan, and our main headquarters based in Dublin in Ireland. So that is where Noel and myself are based. So why choose CIS? Basically, why should we consider doing operational research? Why should we consider doing our clinical trials in these market areas? One reason in particular that we would find important is that when you're recruiting for patients, there are a lot higher enrollment rates in these markets. Higher enrollment rates to include reasons being centralised healthcare system. This helps to keep patients within all institutions, allowing for a much more smoother recruitment process. There is an average of 3 months turnaround time from the start of submission pre to first site initiation in the likes of Georgia, which has been mentioned today and is a new player within the industry. There's untapped potential in CIS region. It is 7 times faster than the rest of the world. It can be in terms of getting your trial set up from start to finish. Kazakhstan, which has also been mentioned a few times, the medical system is still very centralized, so clinical studies will be conducted in large medical centers, meaning getting your results, having your patient feedback, there'll be less turnaround time, so this all adds to higher enrollment rates. Rescue studies are also quite popular at the moment in the industry, and especially when you are looking at rare indications and protocols. So these are definitely emerging in the market today. So higher enrollment rates are definitely clear and can be seen in CIS markets. In addition to higher enrollment rates in these markets, we can also look at comparative costing. So when compared with the EU and US, but also taking into consideration the therapeutic area and the complexity of your study, it can be seen that doing your trials in these markets can actually be 30 to 50% less. So savings can then contribute to further studies and higher participants, allowing for much more valuable research provisions. So you can save money in one area to increase the complexity of your study. Phase 3 international trials are favourably completed in Kazakhstan by large pharma companies today. And I have worked with pharma companies in the past where Kazakhstan, Georgia and Russia are key to phase 3 and they're key to getting these trials completed. And again, the lower costing structures in these markets. So higher enrollment rates and comparative costing. In addition to these two, the global standards and regulations are incorporated. Any clinical trial in Russia adheres to global standards and regulations, and therefore the FDA and the EMA will accept data from these studies conducted there. Approval by local ethics committees in Georgia precedes approval by the regulatory authority, so this helps to improve your clinical trial timelines in Georgia. Kazakhstan is part of the Eurasian Economic Union, allowing for a simplified logistics with its neighbouring countries such as Armenia, Belarus, Georgia and Russia. And these member states have recently harmonised rules and regulations, allowing for a much more timely response. And again, local legislations are harmonised with EU directives and GCP rules. So again, this all ties back to getting your clinical trial from start to finish in a faster and much more efficient space of time. So higher enrolment rates, comparative costs, and the global standards and regulations have been incorporated in all these regions. In addition to that, Russia, Belarus, Georgia, Kazakhstan, and Ukraine all have experienced professionals. Russia boasts a large pool of experienced and motivated investigators. And in addition, there are GCP trained and certified investigative sites generating high quality data. In Georgia, there's been a steady increase in the number of physicians since 2006, and that has been increasing steadily throughout the years. This is notable that we've seen considerable improvements in health data collection. So all of these experienced professionals are experienced in oncology, AIDS, MS, spinal muscular atrophy, autoimmune and cardiology, and that helps add to the portfolio of reasons why you should do business in these regions of CIS. In addition to that, the regions have seen recent investments. So recent investments in health infrastructure mean good health facilities and modern diagnostics equipment are made available for clinical trials. Doctors in Kazakhstan complete CRFs by themselves, and this contributes to a higher quality of CRF complexity and completion. CIS has big plans for expansion. The market size for pharma products has grown by 22% year on year end. So there is only one way for this emerging market and untapped potential, and that is up. Steadily rising numbers of clinical trials are corroborated by numerous FDA and EMA inspections. So these government and these bodies all support clinical trials in this area. In addition to that, the import and export requirements. So it's key to note that no import or export license is needed for study drug of lab kits or biosamples in Georgia. So again, Georgia is the fastest probably of the 5 to get your clinical trial completed. In Ukraine, however, the importation of unregistered medicinal product, comparator and drug of complement therapies do not require import permits. So the country also offers an efficient regulatory approval process that compares favourably with other countries in CIS markets. And post-marketing studies that have been completed in recent years show that Russia and CIS region is favourable from a marketing point of view. So Russia is the beast of the CIS countries. It is the one that's got so much untapped potential, and so many pharma companies today are looking east for new ideas. They're looking in Russia, they're looking in Georgia. So emerging markets, are they a growing trend? Something I've noticed within the industry and having completed many studies along my time in my career is that Georgia's up and coming. It's been up and coming for quite some time. Russia's quite popular, and there are many pharma companies today that are actively using these countries for their trial bases and getting their work completed quick and efficient. Some key players to name that have been seen on the Gov website, and I have actually had personal experience in working alongside, are the likes of Merck, Daiichi Sankyo Pharma, Loxo Oncology, AstraZeneca, and Millennium Pharmaceuticals. So this is taken from reference of the .gov website and my own personal experience in having worked on some trials. So not only that, the markets are emerging, they're a growing trend, but we also have a lot of experience in a lot of therapeutic areas in this field. So the likes of autoimmune, oncology, AIDS, rheumatology, SARS-CoV-2, cardiology, all these different therapeutic areas, have been conducted, studies have been conducted to help aid research and development in these therapeutic areas in our top 5 countries. And also, again, I have experience in these therapeutic areas. And Corex, in partnership with Corex Academy, Corex Logistics have experience in working alongside all of these therapeutic areas and helping to support clinical trial services. So in a nutshell, basically, why choose CIS? Higher enrollment rates, comparative costing. It's preceded by global standards and regulations incorporated. There are a lot of highly experienced professionals in these markets. It's experienced a lot of recent investments in up-to-date technologies. It's also got quite a lot of beneficials whenever it comes to importing and exporting. It is proven to be a key player with emerging markets and big pharma companies of today, biotech included, and CROs. And we have experience, highly experienced in different therapeutic areas that are quite important for pharma companies, biotechs alike, in getting clinical trials completed. I'm just going to run you through a brief case study. It won't take too long, but it's basically an example of where Corex Academy and Corex Logistics combined have been able to help a pharma company in the past. So not naming any names, but this is a client that is a world leader who had launched a global program. It was taking a patient-centered approach to delivering drugs. The client themselves had delivered an IT system for doctors and patients to register and generate requests for drug delivery by therapy, as listed before. Take cardiology, for instance. It could have been a cardiology study. So clients and staff at this pharma company would have approved requests and sent manual emails off to a logistics company to then have the drug shipped. The task for ourselves at Corex and Corex Logistics and Corex Academy was to implement a system with the logistics provider system so that approval requests would be automatically sent. When we're in this industry, patient impact is a huge important factor. We want to limit patient impact as much as possible. So ourselves at Corex, working alongside one of the world leaders, were able to implement this system that meant their staff didn't have to manually send emails. The email would have went straight to their patient-centered approach and straight to our logistics service, where we would automatically receipt and send straight to client, increasing and improving timelines. So this meant that Corex were able to implement the system alongside the pharma company within a quick and efficient time frame of 8 to 12 weeks. With all of our team of experts at hand, we were able to deliver the client request, enabling Russia to become the first country in EMEA where this pilot project was completed. The system was implemented and it is now in use. Just an example of how working effectively in clinical trial services can help pharma companies of today. So that's just a small case study, and yeah, that's everything from me, just an example on why CIS is important. So back to you, Noel.
Listen, Michelle, thank you very much. I'm sure the audience has enjoyed you sharing both your experience and knowledge today. Really appreciate it. I suppose one of the other things is, it seems to me from what I've been hearing today about that the emerging markets are certainly seem to be coming into their own, both today and in the near future. So certainly they're markets to watch.
Definitely.
If you could stop sharing your screen, Michelle, that would be great. Thank you very much. And yeah, what I'd also like to do is, you made your presentation, Michelle, looking at the top 5 countries in which to do business. In your opinion, which country in CIS shows the most untapped potential today for anything to do with either pharma, biotech, clinical trials, or the clinical trials services?
So I would say, probably in my own personal opinion, Kazakhstan is definitely up and coming, and it ties in very nicely. At the moment, it is an emerging market with a lot of untapped potential. A lot of pharma companies and biotech companies are looking to Kazakhstan to now complete clinical trials. Obviously Russia being a really key and big player in the pharma world, but Kazakhstan's definitely up and coming at the moment for all the right reasons. We are at Corex, as you know, Noel, we're introducing our new depot in Kazakhstan. So it's going to be perfect for any upcoming trials with pharma companies. It's definitely going to help, I suppose, fill that untapped potential with having Corex out there in the open.
Well, listen, thanks again, Michelle. Really enjoyed your presentation. So could you stay with us for our question and answer session, which we'll start now. So could I ask each of the speakers to switch on their videos again? Luke, I think we'll just wait for yourself to join us. And what I'd like to do, because we still have a little bit of time left over for our Q&A section. Good to see you guys. So we have received, we've received quite a number of questions from our audience, and I want to say thank you. So I suppose, look, two of the questions, we'll have time to cover two of the questions. So on the first question, we'll go up over for COVID-19 pandemic. It's been the most, as I said earlier on, the most media covered subject worldwide over the last 17 months. So could I ask you briefly, each of you, what your experience has been and how you managed through it? I'm sure each of you have had different experiences. So I'll start maybe with Luke.
Yeah. Luckily, it hasn't affected us anywhere near as badly as it has in a lot of other places, simply because the government didn't lock down that much here. Now, again, I think part of the reason for that is that Russia doesn't have as elderly a population as, let's say, Western Europe, and in particular Southern Europe. I mean, life expectancy in Russia is lower, and there is no furlough scheme over here. So essentially, the government wasn't giving away free money, so people had to fend for themselves, as they have had to do, for the entire history. And if there's one thing about this part of the world, is that people are extremely resourceful when it comes to difficult times. And I've been through this, I would say, is my fifth downturn or crisis or whatever you want to call it. And this was probably the weirdest one. I was here in '98 when the ruble crashed. Then we had the tech crash in 2001. Then we had the world financial disaster in 2008-9, from which this part of the world rebounded fairly quickly. Then obviously in Russia in particular, we had the sanctions because of the Crimea annexation, which happened pretty much at the same time as the crash in the price of oil, and the ruble tanked. And then we've had this one, which is medical. Now, on the whole, I think people have shown themselves to be extremely resilient here. Ukraine went through a much longer, tougher lockdown, as did Kazakhstan. Russia stayed largely open, at least domestically. You couldn't get in or out. Sorry, you could get out as a foreigner. You get back in as a Russian, but the borders closed down, but you could move within the country. So on the whole, it hasn't been anywhere near as bad, I think, as it has been. I was in the UK over Christmas. I think part of that is the fact that people over here don't generally trust the government. I've had my second Sputnik jab, so I'm fully vaxxed, but the uptake has been very low. People just generally are very distrustful of authorities with things like this.
So it hasn't actually been too bad overall.
No,
so yeah.
No.
So thank you, Luke. So can I ask Andrei what your own experience has been? Andrei, you're on mute. I'll just ask you to unmute.
Sorry,
No
yeah. It's always the problem. As a medical affairs, we are mostly involved, I would say, in medical education activity rather than data generation. So we lost the opportunity to conduct our traditional educational events when we invite physicians to some place and invite our speakers to talk. And of course, we immediately switched to webinars option and visited our key experts in regions remotely. So that was actually one thing I wanted to mention, and I can say that the digital part of our life was developing actually before COVID, but COVID was like, like fuel for this, and we started to use digital options, of course, much wider. And now we are thinking about some position in medical affairs department dedicated to digital technologies. So maybe we will have someone who can support us in developing it further in the future. Another point is that we couldn't see each other inside our team. So then again, we had to adopt it. We had to find some solutions, how to continue to communicate, how to interact. And again, of course, we use remote meetings, and we continue to do it. For the moment, we see some improvement in this, and we started to do visits to our healthcare professionals in regions, and the situation is getting better and better. So
so Andrei, that is excellent, and thank you very much for sharing that with us. Could I actually interrupt you and ask you one other brief question that has come in from the audience? Is it possible to conduct BA-BE studies in Ukraine for pharmaceutical companies from EU countries? And if so, would the results of such studies be approved by national or international drug administrations? The question was specifically for yourself. If you feel comfortable to answer it over while we're on the video, great. If you don't, we can organize an answer to the gentleman afterwards.
Yeah, I believe it's possible to conduct bioequivalence studies for any pharmaceutical company. Doesn't matter if they apply in accordance with healthcare authorities requirements for the studies, they can do it easily. And I know that maybe I have less experience in Ukraine, but in Russia it's absolutely fine. Then you can conduct bioequivalence studies. Again, nevertheless, you are a local company or you are an international company.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And briefly, Michelle, just if you want to run your experience as well, how you managed through the COVID-19.
Yeah, so I was traveling a lot for business in the Balkans areas of Serbia and Croatia, just up until COVID had taken over. And I guess we had a lot of logistics, I guess, from the COVID testing. So we were busy working on quite a lot of the logistics side in terms of the national testing scheme that was going on. So my work prior to joining Corex, I had been working quite intensely on the COVID-19 side of things in terms of testing, working with the distributors and end users in different markets of the Balkans. And it has been quite, I guess, it's been quite difficult. You know, you're not seeing your customers face to face as much, and I do like to have that face to face interaction. I do love visiting different laboratories when I can, or when I had in the past. Being able to teach people new software, you know, new skills, developing them in the new products and new services. So you're not getting that interaction anymore. Like I really do miss that. So hopefully, now that I'm actually fully vaccinated myself, I will be getting back to the travel side of things, and COVID won't be stopping me, and surely won't be stopping Corex.
I hope it's going to start soon. Guys, we were going to have another question, but I'm conscious of time. We're running 3 minutes over, and there have been so many questions raised which we did not get to discuss today, and unfortunately we have run out of time. So first of all, I'd like to thank our wonderful speakers for sharing your insights and expertise today. Thank you very much. And a special thank you, of course, to the audience for your attendance and participation. That's what makes this webinar the reason to have it. A link to today's webinar recording and a certificate of attendance will be sent to your email tomorrow. And if you have any problems with the certificate or the link, please inform us. I trust you enjoyed listening to each of our speakers at our webinar today. I certainly did. And we look forward to hearing from you as to what your next webinar theme preferences are. So see you at our next webinar, and I'll say thank you. Thank you to everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Have a
Take
great
care.
day, guys. Bye.
Thank you very much for attending.
Потому что вот мне мешать вот это вот всю в одну кучу очень хотелось. Ну, то есть там, по идее, нужно, чтобы это никак не влияло ни на архитектуру, на понимаешь? И это вообще по-хорошему, чтобы эта история была параллельно, да, сделана. Ну, то есть, или там на момент запуска, да.